Noah Kareem lived a quiet life on the edge of Clearwater Creek, tucked into a valley that once belonged to no one but nature and time, where the scent of pine and soil replaced concrete and car exhaust, where his grandfather had raised a family, with bare hands and wood-hewn shelter, and where now Noah had taken root in the same humble cabin. Choosing solitude over the noise of modern life, his land stretched just far enough to matter acres of old forest, sloping riverbank, and, most importantly, the narrow creek that had wound its way through 3 generations. The bridge he built across that creek wasn't just timber and nails, it was Harriet's, a personal act of craft and memory, shaped without permission because none was needed. He had laid each plank himself, tested the strength against storms, and watched dear dogs and nieces cross it with laughter or silence. It wasn't beautiful in the magazine sense, but it belonged, it fit, it stood. That changed when Lakeview Heights emerged like a rich man's ranch on the other side of the hill, a private community of sprawling white mansions with wine cellars, security drones, and HOAs with nothing better to do than invent problems. They'd bought up plots quick, reshaped the valley's quiet into sterile modernity, and soon, he was receiving thick envelopes with crisp headers and embossed seals, citing unregulated structures and unauthorized environmental alterations, as if the creek didn't predate their concrete castles. Noah, patient as he was stubborn, ignored them. He knew his rights, knew where his land began and ended, knew that their rules stopped at his gate, but they escalated. First came the fines, then threats of legal action, then warnings about civil liability for non-compliance, all dropped off by a different suit or intern, none willing to answer questions or speak like neighbors. Then, one April morning, the sound came not birdsong or river flow, but the grinding snarl of diesel engines and tracks cracking gravel, a sound Noah hadn't heard since his time in the Corps. He dropped his coffee and ran down the slope, breath tightening as he saw the machines, a yellow bulldozer already halfway through his land, flanked by men in polo shirts and hard hats, with HOA badges clipped to their belts like they were cops. They didn't pause when he shouted, didn't acknowledge the no trespassing sign, didn't offer a warrant or an apology. They moved with the authority of people used to getting away with everything. The bridge shattered under the weight of the steel blade, collapsing into the water in jagged chunks. Years of memory turned to debris in seconds. One mantle, with slick back hair and aviators, smirked at Noah as if this were a lesson being taught. It was non-compliant, he said over the engine roar, as if that explained the invasion, the destruction, the insult. Noah lunged forward, rage burning his throat, but a security guard stepped in his path. Step back, sir, or we'll call the sheriff. He did, not because he feared the law, but because he knew how the system worked. Knew they'd spin it as aggression. From a hostile local, he stood in silence, fists shaking, as they packed up and drove off, leaving tire tracks like scars in the mud and the creek polluted with splinters. That night, Noah sat by the fire pit outside the cabin, watching the smoke swirl into the stars, replaying every moment with bitter precision. The bridge was more than wood. It was a line and they'd crossed it. He called the sheriff the next day, filed a report, but the deputy just sighed and said, "It's a civil matter, sir. You'll need to take it up with their legal team." Legal team. Noah didn't have one. He had tools, and memory, and anger. The following days were spent pacing, planning. He walked the creek every morning, mapped its contours, measured the slope, studied how it twisted and descended toward the lower elevation where, coincidentally, Lakeview's showcase mansion rested like a throne. It was a $6 million symbol of power, perched above what used to be a wetland before they drained and landscaped it into a golf green lawn. Noah remembered the construction crews, the noise, the trucks that tore up the soil and rechanneled runoff so their wine cellars wouldn't flood. He remembered watching, even then, wondering if greed would ever stop. Now he had his answer. On the 5th day after the destruction, he loaded up his pickup with gravel, shovels, and a few lengths of pipe. He drove upstream, far enough from the mansion to remain unseen, but close enough to matter. With careful effort, he began digging, not wide, not obvious, just enough to shift the water's course a few feet. Each day, he returned, adjusting the slope, testing the flow with buckets, ensuring nature did the rest. He built no dam, broke no law. He simply redirected the natural stream along a forgotten low channel that once existed before bulldozers buried it. Then it rained. For days, the trench deepened, the water surged, and the bypass he'd quietly carved began to do its work, funneling gallons toward the basin where Lakeview's trophy mansion glowed under motion lights and imported palm trees. Noah didn't rush the process. He let the land do the talking. He worked at night, wore gloves, cleaned his boots with bleach. He wasn't a criminal, he was restoring balance. When the flood finally hit, it came with eerie grace, first soaking the basement, then crawling over the marble floors, shorting lights, bursting pipes. The mansion's security cameras caught everything. Panic, servants running, the HOA president screaming into his phone as water rose past his ankles. The footage leaked online within hours, turning local gossip into national mockery. million. Home washed away by Rogue Creek. The headlines read, engineers were baffled. City officials claimed it was an unexpected redirection of natural drainage. The HOA blamed Noah, of course, but they had no proof. He'd done nothing illegal, nothing traceable. The sheriff visited him once, asked a few polite questions. Noah handed him a cup of coffee and said he'd been planting trees all week. The officer nodded. Case closed. The bridge was gone, but the land remembered. And now, so would they. Noah Kareem woke before sunrise in the days that followed. Not out of guilt or anxiety, but out of instinct. A steady hum in his chest that told him the land was shifting, responding, cooperating with a kind of quiet, righteous fury. The creek had always been more than a body of water to him. It was memory, heritage, and breath. But now it had become something else, to a tool, a voice, maybe even a weapon. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and though the valley had seen storms before, this one was different. Heavy, deliberate, slow-moving. The soil swelled like a sponge. The sky sagged with clouds. The bypass trench he had dug gently, methodically, was now a living artery, pulsing with diverted water, carrying it steadily away from its natural path into the lowland just beneath the shining jewel of Lakeview Heights. Noah had no intention of harming people, just property, more precisely. The arrogance built into property, the entitlement woven into every HOA resolution, every unsolicited letter, every smug warning that came wrapped in legalese and faux concern. The mansion that sat downhill had been built in defiance of logic and landscape, a $6 million Leviathan perched too close to a floodplain, with an underground theater, 6 bathrooms, and 3 levels of polished wood and exposed glass. It was the pride of Lakeview, home to Arthur Denning, the HOA president who had ordered Noah's bridge bulldozed without permission, court order, or the decency of a face-to-face conversation. Arthur was the type of man who made his fortune through inherited wealth and real estate flips, then pretended he'd earned it all with grit and vision. He talked about community at HOA meetings, but filed lawsuits against neighbors who parked the wrong way. He sipped wine older than his wife and hired private security to patrol for trespassers in the woods. It was his mansion that would take the brunt of Noah's carefully redirected storm surge, and the irony was almost too clean. Noah hadn't touched a pipe or a wall, hadn't placed a single explosive. He'd used the slope, the water, and gravity, nature's silent engineers. By the 4th night, the rain reached its peak. From the ridge near his cabin, Noah could see the faint glint of floodlights flickering at the Lakeview compound. As if someone finally realized the danger wasn't theoretical, he crouched behind the trees, waterproof jacket soaked through, and watched the mansion's lower level glow like a fishbowl while water crept across the lawn, swallowing golf holes, chewing through garden beds, and slipping beneath the marble patio that surrounded the in-ground pool. The security drones buzzed overhead, scanning for intruders. But they couldn't stop the creek, couldn't arrest rain or water or erosion. By dawn, the lower ground was a swamp. The retaining wall, a vanity project built for aesthetics, not function, cracked under pressure. Water surged in like a thief. Surveillance footage later leaked anonymously showed Arthur Denning waking to alarms and blinking floodlights, scrambling downstairs in designer pajamas, only to find his wine cellar submerged in 2 feet of muddy water and rising. His voice could be heard, yelling at someone, probably his wife or the security team, asking who let this happen and why the town wasn't sending help. The town wasn't coming. They had warned Lakeview about runoff years ago, but the HOA buried it in legal appeals. The foundation buckled by noon. Noah watched from his ridge, binoculars steady, the way a farmer watches a harvest unfold. He didn't cheer. This wasn't about celebration, it was about restoration, about consequences. It was about a man who had everything learned,